Testing one, two. Hey, we're here. Well, it's great to be here in Clarenville. For many decades of traveling across the province, living in Corner Brook, Bay Islands, Clarenville was always one of the stops, right? Where there were flush toilets. And, those, you used to get those peanut butter marshmallow things at the Irving, right? Where it was like full of sugar and good things like that. But it was one of the places you'd stop on the way across. And the other thing is that Clarenville, and the mayor isn't here anymore, but Clarenville has some great hiking trails. So if you've been driving for 4 or 5 hours, you want to hike, there's one just down on the bottom of the hill there. Beautiful set of loops. We did it yesterday again. And there's one that's overlooking the Sound, which is really great. Anybody here from Clarenville want to give a shout out to your hiking trails? The beauty of hiking trails is that it's good for the people who live here. And then it's also good for people who come. And that's a little bit of a theme today, is that if you're doing well, if you're being sustainable, you create a sustainable sector. But we start there. Anyway, but let me not get ahead of myself, because I need to walk around because I need to get my steps, the 10,000 steps. So it's not because I have any sort of medical condition, but I hope I don't make too many whales there. But it's wonderful here to talk about food because... yes, there we are. And how it's raised and produced and packaged, and how some of it is driven across oceans and deserts and makes it to us, being retailed and so on, ends up in our fridges and cupboards and stomachs sometimes. I love to talk about food almost as much as I love to eat food. And it seems like, why is that? It seems like the more I read about and listen to people talking about food, the less I seem to know. Or certainly the less I have confidence in knowing that I used to think that I knew, because food is complicated. I grew up on a mixed farm in Bruce County in Ontario, in what now seems like the olden days. I went to one-room schoolhouse, used to walk a half a mile to the schoolhouse. That's back when we had miles. And I grew up with all of those great jokes about city slickers and country bumpkins and so on, which I won't bear you with or whatever. But I have lots of preconceptions about that period of my life and what agriculture was about, because all of my family were involved in it. I ended up, though, living most of my life in various cities of various sizes, and generally within quick distance of rural areas or wild areas. But I have a bunch of preconceptions about that as well from the strictly consumer point of view, despite having gardens there. But now I live on we live on the west end of a small, very diverse city, Kitchener, in Ontario, which is right nestled in among 4 eagerly active townships, 4 rural townships, including the township that Pfennigs Organic lives in. And ironically, Pfennigs is also doing a lot of stuff with the local indigenous groups, with the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, and they've moved their sugar bush is now what the Haudenosaunee use as examples of how they taught the settlers about maple syrup, which is where it came from. Likewise, corn and potatoes and tomatoes and beans. Anyway, most of what we eat these days were things that were taught to them. So that's just another shout out for Pfennigs. But being in that area where there's all of this food activity taking place, it's peopled by lots of Amish, old order Mennonites, hipster farmers, big machine farmers, and they all kind of get along. And they've created this really dense network of food activity and farming activity that I'll talk a bit about maybe at some point. But so I have preconceptions about that as well, like what can be done, piece by piece. Life and the ideas we use to explain it to ourselves is sometimes complicated. It's sort of like there's 2 lines there: comforting lies, long line, unpleasant truths, nobody. It's sort of like complex but helpful solutions to your problems. Nobody wants to know about that. But if I were to say, I have simple but ineffective solutions, you'll probably listen, because that seems like a lot more fun. Okay, I'm in that lineup a lot of times myself. This is going to be fun because I don't usually jump 2 things at one time. So I might drop this, I'm sorry, or this, which is not a problem. Sustaining agriculture is a really hot topic. Like if you ask anybody, ask a farmer, ask a gardener, ask a policymaker, even ask a researcher. And the trouble is we can't really agree on the nature of the question even to get started, like let alone the possible answers. And I'm no better than the rest. Don't let that depress you though, because it's by embracing the darkness, it's by embracing the complexity that we're able to find our way through, the confusion. It's the impeded stream that sings. Or as Leonard Cohen put it, it's the crack in everything that lets the light in. So let's just engage it and not be depressed by it. So when I saw the title for this talk, I thought, oh, what's the punctuation on that? I guess I better point it in the right way. Yes. Is it sustainable agriculture in Newfoundland and Labrador? Or is it an exclamation mark? Sustainable agriculture in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I was trained as an academic, so of course I would have something like sustainable agriculture in Newfoundland and Labrador, meta-analysis of the multifactorial consequential influences of the structural potentialities of food production modalities. That's the way I would present it, and you're probably glad that I'm not giving that paper. Although I might be. You don't really know, really. This talk is made possible by the work and the insight of many people, some of whom are in this room today because I interviewed you. So farmers and thinkers and food geeks and poets, even a few researchers occasionally. But don't worry, you can't be blamed for what I'm saying. So we need to begin by asking where we're beginning. Or where is the wharf upon which we set out? Like the water is pretty choppy and the sky's a bit uncertain. But our boat is solid. We've laid in provisions. So let's go. I'll get to a simple working definition in just a moment. But one of my biases is I likely focus on the micro level a little bit more on people, on farms, on families, than on the macro level. Often when we talk about sustainability, we talk in the big scheme of things. So what sectors are we going to focus on, to get our economy going? Any politician, this is politics 101, you got to do this stuff. How do we get economies of scale? Oh, that's a word that makes me shiver. Because of the way it's been used in the past. How do we educate consumers? What crops or animals or products do we focus on? Or how do we become the biggest producer of, whatever the latest fad is? Sea buckthorn, whatever. Remember the sea buckthorn fad in Newfoundland and Labrador? I remember it too fondly. There were some great discussions. At the time the discussions were taking place, they were actually ripping out sea buckthorn because it wasn't working. So it was a really ironic situation. Anyway, these are very useful conversation points if you're running for election, or they're useful conversation points if you're an economist or whatever. But they've also resulted in a lot of dead ends. And the other thing, the macro lens is it's an abstraction. It's a construction. It's really the sum total of the micro activities of many, 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 many farmers and gardeners and food producers and cooks and so on. It's the sum total of the actions of individuals working on their own sustainability every day and in their own greenhouse or on their own land or in your kitchen. Now, I'm not suggesting that the macro questions aren't important at some point, but I think, how we organize our food distribution is important, sure. What we grow is important, sure. The actions of food producers working together, that's a crucial element. But all of this builds upon sustainable individuals. I might have to have this. There we go. By the way, these pictures don't necessarily relate to what I'm talking about, but people need to stay awake during these events. And the trick is, farmers are used to fresh air outside. You get them inside in a room that is now lower in oxygen content than it was an hour ago. It's continuing to go down during this time. And naturally, you'll fall asleep, right? It has nothing to do with what I'm saying, right? Right? Yeah. Anyway, so you'll have to figure out in yourself, what does that have to do with sustainable individuals. But that's your job, not mine. So sustainable individuals, sustainable farms, sustainable gardens, sustainable kitchens, sustainable family units. And what does it take to sustain an individual? You or I, your farm or my garden or whatever. It might not be the same as what we argue about when we talk about sustaining a whole segment of society or creating a market or whatever. And the macro is also subject to some pretty large social forces, some great powers in the marketplace and in politics and in public opinion. And so it's really hard as me, an individual sitting in my kitchen, thinking of how do I navigate through the market the way it is? Like, how do I survive? How do I sustain with all these huge powers over me? Demands like, high production and high quality and low cost. I mean, you can only have two of the three. Now you're thinking in your head, so which two am I going for? Or the bias, toward sort of do-it-yourself stuff. Farmers, for the fact, despite the fact that they do work together a lot, sometimes are also subject to this idea that they need to be an individual and be tough on their own and survive. But at the individual level, we do have some agency. We have some control when it comes to our own sustainability at the farm level. And that's why I sometimes focus on that. Just a proviso, beware of the advice industry. I'm part of that right now, even as we speak. Speakers like me are, Michael Foley, if anybody read his book called Farming for the Long Haul, he has this chapter early on. It's titled, A Short, Unhappy History of Business Advice for Farmers. It's short, at least. But he talks about the last century and a half of extension work in this continent. And, we've had lots of advice from folks during this time. And some of it has been useful, but in my experience, a lot of it tends to be from people who are not food producers themselves, who don't really listen to food producers. They're not really learning from food producers. Or there may be people with a vested interest in some sort of business, ag-related business. So the tendency has been advice about things like, this is partly what Gabe is saying too, accepting technologies without due thought. There's some great new technologies out there, but there's a lot of fields littered with rusted stuff that people bought. You can go around here, there's a lot of rusty greenhouses that somebody built. There's cement, foundations here and there. Somebody had a good idea, and an expert told them, and maybe a banker loaned them the money for it. So just be careful about technologies. And the one thing you can certainly learn from the old order and the Amish and so on is they're careful about the technologies they choose. But they choose a lot of really good new technologies, but they don't choose every technology because they make a choice. Well, the bishop tells them, but other than that, so the other thing that they do is they get in debt to scale up because that's a big thing. And when you have debt, you have somebody on your back constantly. So that's something that the advice industry was responsible for. They said commodity over specialization, one or two or three things, and that's it. Or trusting the marketplace. In the marketplace, like all the gods and goddesses around, there's some that are beneficial and there's some that are angry. And so marketplaces are like that as well. But anyway, that's just a little, farming has to beware of the advice industry, and that includes what I'm saying now. So if what I'm saying doesn't fit with how you're feeling in the deepest, darkest moments of your despair, or in those moments of joy and celebration, then, relax. Follow your own advice. Remember, no, none of you, you're too young, because this is young farmers, right? But when Dr. Spock came out in, the 1950s, and he said to parents, relax. You're the expert on your child. Follow your intuition about raising them. Don't be so, because there was a lot of really restrictive parenting advice at that time. Don't do this, do that. Don't shake hands with your children. Don't hug them, all that sort of thing. And in some ways, some of the advice that I think is useful too for gardening and farming is relax. You're the expert on your piece of land. and follow what your intuition is. Oh, you sure, listen to other people, Google it or whatever, or go on YouTube or find out. But you probably know better about what's going on in that because you're there every day. Just like parents probably know better about their kids than some guy in a suit somewhere. Okay, so beware of the advice industry. Okay, that's enough of that. Since I'm actually supposed to be part of it, it really cuts to the leg of what I'm doing here to say, don't trust what I'm saying, but you understand why I'm saying that, right? Yeah, okay. So be a thoughtful consumer of advice. And the other thing is that in the advice industry, we have this tendency to say, here are the 5 things you need to do to be a successful farmer. Oh, and if you don't like those 5, I've got 5 more back in this pocket here. Like, there's no shortage of there's the 5 things that you need to do. And I'm sucked in by social media too, and it says, oh, here are the 2 early warning signs of dementia. Do you ever see those? I've never followed it through. I wonder what they are. One is being sucked into something like that. Like if you're following that, then obviously you're in trouble. So what is sustainability anyways? I'm 20 minutes in and I still haven't defined this, right? These days it seems like, the advice industry is sustainable, but let's get off that. We could do an entire course on sustainability. You would be probably amazed, maybe not, at the number of times since I started doing a bit of internet searching around about how do people use the term, of master's degree courses that wants me to join them in sustainable agriculture. I've never had any of those ads until the last month or so, month and a half. So there's a whole bunch of them. Guelph has some, and I could do all kinds of things on sustainable agriculture. So there's a lot of people talking about it. It's a slippery term and it has a bit of a history because it kind of comes from a term, subsistence agriculture. But subsistence agriculture was made up by dour Presbyterians. It doesn't sound very good, subsistence agriculture. It doesn't capture the experience of many folks who are actually doing it, who grow, raise, hunt, gather some of their own food. It sounds like a hard scrabble existence, right? It sounds like, the peasants who are growing food around the world. We call them in subsistence agriculture, but we really don't, until we get to know them and learn their dances and songs, we don't really think that their life is all that nice. So there's a problem with a term like sustainable agriculture too, because it sounds a little bit stigmatizing almost in a way. You're just sustaining yourself. That's why regenerative agriculture has become more popular. Although the differences between the two are sometimes very fine. But I think that terms like sustainable or subsistence don't really capture the lived experience of many food producers. When I come back since I've moved to Upper Canada, to Newfoundland and Labrador, and I chat with people who are farming here, I'm always amazed at the patience, the resilience of people who, in spite of everyday feedback loops that are positive about what they're doing, continue to farm and to raise food and to grow food season after season. That is subsistence. That is sustainable, because a part of sustainability is all intellectual, psychological, emotional, spiritual even. And that if you don't have that, you'll never be physically sustainable. But we'll get to that a bit more later. The trick is, we kind of know sustainable agriculture when we see it, but it's really hard to put it down on paper or to teach it. It's sort of like in the world of biology and death studies, which I used to do, there is a lot of debate about when a person dies, the actual moment. Like, is it the heart, is it the brainstem, cellular levels, and so on, because the body doesn't die all at the same time. But when you see a dead body, you pretty much know. It's hard to put it down on paper what made that person dead, but it's easy to see. And I think with sustainability, sometimes you go and you visit somebody and it's just something not in the air, but it's something in the person and their response to their what they're doing. And as they show you their land and their animals or whatever, or their kitchen or their greenhouse, you get a sense, you get a whiff of sustainability. Here's somebody who's going to last. But I can't really put it on paper very easily. But you can maybe guess that. It has nothing to do with their big machines. Maybe, like me, you visited a lot of big farms, some big farms, and you had this sense, this is not going to end well. And sometimes it doesn't. So sustainability isn't just an economic thing. It's something that we can actually feel. Okay, so you're saying, Ivan, what is a definition we can use? This is a really short, small definition, but it's based on all kinds of longer ones. And lately they've put textile in there as well, just to show that we're really hip. And I wanted to do that too, meeting society's present food and textile needs without compromising the ability for current or future generations to meet their needs. Pretty straightforward, yep. There are a few CSAs, none in Newfoundland and Labrador that I know of, that actually include textiles in what they give. So they give wool, yarn, linen. So that they're really trying to live that idea of textile. Have you heard about the 100-mile wardrobe? Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. There are books about it. And they're trying to find out how can we, like the stores that I buy them from are within 100 miles, but I don't think that's what they're talking about, So it's very aspirational. And there's nothing wrong with aspirational because that's the cusp on which we live as human beings, isn't it? Is that aspirational. So it's a bit like sustainability is a verb. It's not necessarily a destination. It's not necessarily a noun. I know we use it that way. I have sometimes used it that way, though that's a sustainable farm. But what I'm thinking about more is that what they're doing there, that's the verb, that is sustainability that they're doing there by the things that they do every day and so on. And so I would rather go with a really simple definition like that rather than there are many, many verbs and so on else that we can put in there, lots of different descriptions and all of that. There was a book that was written that was called Tomorrow's Table. And Pamela Rawl, I don't know if anybody's heard of these books, but, I used to read books with footnotes. But they were talking about sustainability, and they thought of sustainability as well as mostly a verb. So they say when they look at a farm, here are some of the things that they see that they would say, okay, that's sustainability. So is it providing abundant, safe, nutritious food? Yeah, well, that's one. Yeah, good. Reduce harmful environmental inputs. Now, it's very vague. We're not talking about how many, chemical parts per million or whatever else. But they're, sustain. It's aspirational. It's a verb. You're moving towards something. And if we put targets on everything, it's really hard because when you don't make the target, give me another beer, whatever. Minimize the use of land and water. Provide safe conditions for farm workers. That's important, and certainly in many contexts. Protect the genetic makeup of native species. At the same time, enhance crop genetic diversity. Foster soil fertility. Improve the lives of the poor and the malnourished. Now there you're getting into, well, was that a farmer's job? Well, that's your job as a human being, for heaven's sakes. So you happen to be a farmer, and so how do you do that job of human beings, of taking care of each other with your farm? Maintain the economic viability of farming in rural communities. Now, you'll see in there that there's a lot of openness. And so they were saying that we get caught up in a lot of debates. There's a lot of debates around GMO and stuff like that. Farmers have been using genetic manipulation of some sort, as long as they've been farmers, in terms of breeding of plants and of animals and so on. And I know GMO often refers more to something more complicated, but they're not really particularly interested in mining that debate. Hasn't really got us anywhere so far. But that if you are protecting genetic diversity, and you're enhancing it sometimes, because we have kale that's particularly good for northern climates. And it makes sense for us to grow that kale here rather than Jamaican kale, right? Nobody's disagreeing. Okay, well, but that's what they're referring to. But that would be an example of if your definition of sustainability in agriculture in Newfoundland and Labrador is a verb, and it's sort of at the individual level, you look at their farms or what you're doing, and is it ticking off some of these at least? Now, it's important to keep things simple. Some of you maybe have read some of the books by Michael Pollan. And people kept asking him, so what's the diet that we should have as human beings? And he came down with 8 words. Does anybody know what they were? Eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. Now, that didn't stop him from writing a half a dozen books about those 8 words, but he said, you need to, if you can't put something simple, maybe you don't understand what it is in your own head. I was socialized as an academic where we say, well, I don't know any lay language. I'm sorry, which always cheesed me off because I thought that means that you don't know what you're talking about if you can't explain to me. But so I thought, could we create a sustainability measurement of some sort that would have just 8 words? You're going to have to help me in a moment here with this because I don't know what these, I thought of these 8 needs met. Okay. You're surviving. That's the physical. Seeds saved. You've got another season. I think we're going to make it into the next season. We've got, nature happy. That's pretty subjective, but it's in good shape. Like it's not in worse shape than it was last year. It's going to grow, I think. Hopeful gratitude. That was a hard one because I think part of sustainability is this attitude that we can make it through another season, not just because physically we've got the seeds and so on, but I've got what is in me. What's in me will last for another season. Sometimes it's difficult of you to say, if I would do a survey here, okay, how many of you think you'll still be farming in 5 years? Oh, good. And you're so good because you put your hand up even without me saying put your hand up. That means you're really sustainable. That's right. But that's a part of an attitude rather than a knowledge, in terms of your farm and so on. What are some 1, 2, 3 word phrases that you would put in for sustainability? Can you think of something? Because this is just an attempt. This is just like, okay. Anybody?
Say seeds met, seeds saved, and seeds can represent so much. That's the fortitude that what's keeping you going for next year, right? It's like,
oh my God, we're down to 4 words now. That's right. Yes, Ryan. People healthy. So there you're talking about not just you, the farmer, and your family, but people around you. Yeah. Other terms that you'd throw in to be, they don't have to be personal, but it can be. Like when I think about next year, what is it that is sustainability? Persistence. I keep hearing that word. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, persistence. Resilience. Yep. Stubbornness. Don't diss stubbornness. That's got its place. You think about Maple Leafs fans. Really, these pictures are from Northern Peninsula. They're from back when Grenfell was up in St. Anthony. So Grenfell was a doctor, but he listened to farmers who said, "Okay, you want to create this land, get some pigs. Pigs are really good at rooting. After a season or two, you've got a garden or whatever." But he did have or was told and followed it, the inspiration that if you have people in a region, if you have people in a hospital, you need to feed them. And you need to feed them locally. And for some reason, we've sort of lost that because with Confederation, you could buy your bread in bags and your food in tins, and you can burn your boats and all of that stuff. But there's a whole generation that we're told that that's the way to go, to be modern. And to be fair, I've met lots of older people even older than me, who say, "I'll never eat a turnip again. I don't want to see a cabbage," because they grew up in poverty and that's all they had. And they associate poverty with root crops. In fact, if you have a root crop farm, Maybe you could call it poverty's ours or something like that. You know, just use that as well as you can. Where are we? The other thing about sustainability that I think is really important is the connection to community. And I appreciate that a lot of the content here is talking about community and the fact that you're here together as a community. So this is, I don't know if anybody's read Wendell Berry. He's kind of the poet farmer that he gets a bit funny sometimes and stuff. But an economy genuinely local and neighborly offers to localities a measure of security that they cannot derive from a national or global economy. I know it's a long run-on sentence. Economy controlled by people who, by principle, have no local commitment. Basically, he's saying you can trust your local people because you are from the same area. You really can't have the same trust in a national economy. And I guess that's something that early agricultural entrepreneurs in this province understood. There's no way people would have stayed in Newfoundland and Labrador with the fishery because the merchants weren't giving you much. And the only way they survived was they had sheep and they had chickens and they had vegetables, root vegetables. So what saved us were farmers. So why the heck don't we have songs about that in Newfoundland and Labrador culture? You should all write a song about how this province's culture is based on agriculture, terrestrial, not the fishery, because we sold all that stuff for rum and other things. Anyway, sorry, I was getting a little preachy there. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. But I think that one of the themes of the readings that I've done on agricultural sustainability always seems to talk about this triangle of farmer, land, community. Healthy farmer, healthy land, healthy community. And I think that your activities as a healthy farmer supports the community and back as well. So when we talk about sustainability, even at the individual level, the next step up in this healthy community is that you're helping to create a community that is healthy, that's going to be able to help other farmers as well. The fact that you're here together in a group, talking about circumstances that you might sometimes see as being somewhat less than positive in your farming experience, but you're relying on the ability of others to understand that and to appreciate it and to even nod and whatever it is. You need that community in order to keep the resilience. No one is an island, and so while you might try to, you can't be. You know, people used to think about homesteaders like, oh, they go back in the woods, they're by themselves. What's the largest Facebook group in Atlantic Canada, maybe beyond? It's backyard farming and homesteading or whatever. 40, how many, 50,000? I don't know how many thousand now, I've lost track. These are all not all homesteaders, but they're homestead minded, and they're all talking to each other and they're needing community. Homesteaders need a lot of community. Like they're not like back in the woods. They're not survivalists in the sense that we sometimes think of it. That resilience and for them means community. Who can I talk to if this is happening? And it's worth following just to get all of that. So food is community, but it also creates community. So it's not just the production of food, but obviously even the Canada Food Guide figured out that they kind of relaxed their regulations about food, and they said it's important to eat together. It's important to eat with other people. Even if it's not really great food that you're eating, it's important to eat together because that reinforces the community. And I think that we probably all know there was a time in Newfoundland and Labrador when we were all worried about the budget. We still are, but back then we thought, well, or the government thought, when we have meetings, don't feed them anything or don't give them any coffee. Like, how can you have a meeting and not have food somewhere and expect that people will come, first of all, and enjoy themselves and sit around and chat and so on? It was a killer of everything. And they said, no, that's an unnecessary expense. We found ways around it, so that's always the case. But so sustainability, the other thing so we talked sustainability it's a verb, it's a state of mind as well, it's connected to community, and it starts at home. And sometimes I think that we should be talking about how do we improve the sustainability of farmers. rather than talking about a sector. And we kind of are really doing that. And I think that what you're doing here is really talking about increasing the sustainability of individual farmers and units like that. But I think that we should probably be a little bit more explicit about that and possibly designing our programs so that they provide assistance to the farmers rather than necessarily assistance to certain farmers who already have enough resources to pay 50% of whatever that machine is, or 75%. So first, you have to be sustainable. There is in the environmental movement, there's this saying that you can't have solutions that are good for the environment if they don't also benefit people right now. It has to benefit people now. And likewise, you can't have definitions of sustainable agriculture if they don't also refer to sustainable farmers. It's going to help them right now. It's not good enough to say in the future, if you stop doing this or if you start doing this, you'll get something else in the future. But, you know, I don't know, yeah, you're also young. Back in the early 1970s, in Canada, they decided to create these CanCon regulations. So on the radio, you had to play a certain percentage of Canadian content. And at that time, it was because they had no Canadian music industry to speak of. And they thought, we want to create an industry. How do you create an industry? You created sustainable musicians, sustainable bands who can get money from writing things, who can tour and actually make money. So they created these CanCon regulations, so radio stations had to play the Guess Who, or Celine Dion, or Bryan Adams. But it created an industry. And do you think people were against that? Yes. In fact, the existing music industry was very much against it, because they would lose their monopolies. And since they were largely owned by another country, which is close to us, but is an imperialistic power and always has been, and even more so these days. But anyway, they which will go unnamed, they went ahead and they did it. And so we created the Canadian music industry. In the meantime, we got to dance along with things like Men Without Hats and stuff like that. The safety dance. Remember the safety dance? We probably wouldn't have the safety dance if it weren't for those CanCon regulations. Do we have CanCon regulations about food? Local food? I haven't heard of any. So sustainability begins at home, but it also, there's a conscious way in which you can build that as well. Okay, you've been really, here's just some jokes, okay? This is bologna ramen cake. So ramen noodles with bologna in the middle. Another way to ensure you're never asked to bring anything to a gathering. I'm curious, like what they did with that slice. Did they actually eat it or whatever? Now, I know some of you are thinking, mental note, bologna ramen cake. This is, you're at a party and somebody comes over and they've got you up against the wall. This is what you do during small talk. Nod and smile, just a very bit. Mostly it's plot your escape. How did I get out of here? Oh, I like this on the left. Migraine? No, crazy glue. Sort of get it, he glued his head. Anyway. And I thought, just for the heck of it, AI is big these days. I asked ChatGPT, what's the best advice for young farmers in Newfoundland and Labrador? If you're a young or beginning farmer, they tap into mentorship and land access, land matching, leverage mental health through agri-care, navigate. So that's all stuff you're doing already. You don't need AI. You already know that because you're here. And these are organizations that are here. And that's why don't be too excited about AI, because all it does is trolls the internet and takes what's there. So anyway, we're getting, and I have no idea why this slide is here. I sent it in the other day, or a few days ago, and then afterwards I looked at it, I said, this is a whole different talk. But we were staying in a cabin on Hell Hill Pond, which is down in the south coast of the highway, and it's haunted. I only found that out later, like we'd already stayed. So I'm thinking that that's what happened. So I don't know, sorry. Examples from elsewhere. I just left it in. I kind of probably told them to take it out, but I thought it's more fun that you know that I'm fallible. Right, and that the ghosts exist. it's kind of fun to think about examples from elsewhere. So I just have a couple of things from the EU largely. The thing about learning from elsewhere is you learn two things. Things are different in other places, and things are much the same in other places. And that's the beauty, that's the contradiction of travel, is that there are many different ways to organize your life, but we all have to figure out some way to organize our life in different cultures and in different countries. But so here's a study on the European Union did a study of young farmers. So I tried to think of what are some other studies done elsewhere, other than other parts of Canada. The big thing they found that this was a study in like 28 countries or whatever, a bunch of languages. And they called the young farmers anybody under 40 at that point. I think that age keeps rising. That's the age of farmers. But financial instruments were the big thing. What they meant by that is, what are ways that farmers can actually have a salary of some kind, survive the years it takes to get land or whatever it is, the startup costs. So financial instruments were a big thing, but they asked some more specific questions, which you could ask yourself if you want. European farming today involves many demands and pressures, both professionally and personally for farmers. In consideration of this is written by an academic because it just goes on and on. In consideration of this, is your future as a young farm viable? Is it sustainable? You can say for yourself, very likely, somewhat likely, neutral. And you've got about a fifth say somewhat unlikely or very unlikely. About a fifth say neutral, and about 3/5 say very or somewhat likely. Now, this is a survey answered by young farmers, so they're already motivated. Like if I ask this survey here, you're actually at a meeting where you're learning things and you think that's important. So you would probably have a high likely or very likely as well. But if you survey all, it's trickier. As a young farmer, do you feel responsible for ensuring a sustainable agricultural sector? Europe is a bit different than North America. In Europe, the farmers have really worked on the fact that they are providing ecosystem services for the country. So they provide rural landscapes, they provide streams, they provide great walking trails and so on. We haven't got there, but sometimes they actually get paid for that in certain countries, Switzerland and so on. In Iceland, the milk quota is crazy. It's hard to understand here. But there, if you have sustainable milking practices, you get a bonus per liter. If you have smaller herds, you get a bonus because they're trying to maintain rural communities. And you can't do that with big farms. There's no way. And so they actually provide support for that. That's a financial instrument that provides support. But anyway, it also adds a lot of pressure on you young farmers because now we've figured out, we screwed up the environment. Dang. We're going to have to get those young farmers to fix it. And so the new rules apply to you. I'm being a little bit harsh about that, I suppose, but I fear that that's the way it sometimes plays out in the world. So they feel more pressure or whatever, but they still feel like 90% say yes. We're the ones who will make it a sustaining sector, not anyone else. What do you think is necessary to lead a vibrant and sustainable lifestyle in a rural community? The interesting thing is when they talked about education opportunities, they talked about education opportunities for their kids as well as for them. You can't have a viable rural community and farming community if your kids can't go to school where you live. Social opportunities. That's lifestyle. Farming is, like, just because you're a farmer doesn't mean you don't have a lifestyle needs. You know, that you don't want good coffee once in a while or a nice internet or something like that. But I found it interesting that a number of those were really things about how do I sustain my life here for my whole family beyond my own vision of I'm going to be a farmer. And make a quality of life for everybody. In the UN Toolkit for Young Farmers, again, these are the things that they say they need. This is a larger study from the UN. Access to land. Does that sound familiar? Financial constraints. Does that sound familiar? Succession planning. Lack of technical knowledge. So that's something that we can work on with education and so on, and with farmers' meetings, and with farm radio, which is a big thing in many parts of the world. Sociocultural prejudices against farmers and the need for empowerment. for young farmers because they don't tend to be in decision-making places. I'm down to about 10 minutes, I think, something like that. USDA, so United States Department of Agriculture, they did another study of young farmers. So the three top things that they needed: land, familiar, income, and community support. Some of the other things they mentioned were student debt for them, credit access, and health insurance, which is a uniquely US issue among the developing world. So if you feel like here in Newfoundland and Labrador, things are a little bit different or whatever, they're not necessarily. The way in which we respond to that crisis of land or money is different, but the challenge is the same. A little bit more joke. Okay, it's almost Halloween. I've come for your soul. There's nothing you can do. Oh, is that chocolate? See, that's what you do when the Grim Reaper comes. Just make sure you've got chocolate at the door. I love these little bar chart related deaths. Number of deaths by bar chart. This is just ridiculous. But it's, green. Look at all those people who are going to die. Anyway. Learning from away. I mentioned that I come from a very dense agricultural network in the Waterloo region and the 4 townships, especially around that. And so I thought I'd just give you a few little pictures of how much fun it is to live there and why you should organize a tour to the Waterloo region, which I can be glad to take you around to all the places. And we could eat lots of good Amish food and everything else. So Mr. Amish, so that's just a small business out of Strathroy, and they've kind of got a sense of humor, even though the Amish probably don't really like it very much. This is called Menomex here. A lot of Mennonites went to Russia, and Catherine the Great brought them in, and then they came over in the 1870s or 1920s or 1940s to Canada, and then they moved to Mexico because they couldn't teach their own children Low German and whatever at school. And now they're moving back up as migrant laborers. And they have this thing called Menomex, which is Mexican food and Mennonite food. So you can go to the restaurant and you can buy Ukrainian food, like from the Mexican, and you can buy tacos or whatever. And they're speaking in Low German and Spanish and dressed like, it's really fun. It's really a lot of fun. But that's only possible when you have a certain group of people who are willing to do that. But a lot of people like me go there too, or we go there regularly to buy. Every year, one of the high points is the Amish parochial school auction. So the Amish have their own parochial schools, and to raise money for those schools, they have one huge auction which takes over a farm like an international plowing match. And there are about 10 auctioneers at the same time, and they go down these different lines. Like there's one there selling trees. Here they're selling who knows what. These are just things. They're even selling a covered wagon, and that's their parking lot there. It's just, and then the horses were in another area. But this is the way in which they support each other is by having huge things like this, and then that supports the schools. But it also means it's a lot of fun, and it's great to be there because we were in the minority. Farmers use more and more farmers markets here now. Honesty markets, most of them are. I think they're all honesty markets here. End of the road, you'll see lots of this stuff for sale. Cold drinks, that's a big thing that the kids do, is that they'll have a cooler full of cold drinks for $1, and they look after it, and they're all excited. Flowers is a big thing. They actually rebuild barns. So in some regions where farmers are selling out, you'll have groups who come in as communities, and they'll fix the barns up, they'll tear down things that aren't working. So it's actually rejuvenating the rural areas because of all of those small farmers who have individual sustainability understanding. Oh, this is really too long. Yeah. But I was trying to think about, there's more eggs. Oh yeah, you don't want to see that new price, $2 a dozen. When they get new hens and the eggs are smaller, they're peewees. Usually it's $3.50. This is the St. Jacobs Farmers Market, so that's a huge farmers market where actual farmers come and sell all kinds of stuff. Again, an example of gardens. They do have a couple of flour mills or whatever, so they do local grains. So they'll have farmers who don't know if they want to play the big game because they don't know if they're going to be able to make it. So they sell off some of theirs to smaller mills, and that you can buy as cereal crops or whatever in the stores. This is a goat dairy that I go to regularly. Not really for the goat milk, but they have a great Jersey cheddar that the neighbor's cow gives. So basically, what I was saying there in terms of what it does is that don't worry, you can't do it all at once. Well, the other thing is that there's huge manufacturing that is happening in the farms. So once you have people who know how to fix something, weld something, they can figure out how to make something as well. And then they end up with these big organizations. They're making those large scoops for the front of construction equipment. It is just a step-by-step process. They have laser cutters in their shop and so on. They make auto parts for auto companies. They don't have electricity in the house, but the barn is really high tech. But that's a whole other riddle. These are a couple of the mills, local mills, and again, there's lots of businesses. This would be an example of a general store, so they just have everything you need. So you probably know a few of the places around Newfoundland and Labrador that are dense agricultural communities that have a lot of services for farmers. But there's not very many of them, but you're maybe jealous of some of those. But that community building is really important to the individual farmers, because there's a huge amount of labor that's needed for all of that. There's a huge amount of opportunities. It's become a huge tourist kind of draw as well in some ways. But the back roads, not so much, but lots of local people. So the value of individual farmer sustainability is to you, but the value to all of us is that that farmer creates a community that then builds the environment for more farmers to come. And that's always the hope in any region. And there are some regions in Newfoundland and Labrador where that's building, and you're maybe a part of that groundswell, and you can sit together and sing songs and say, we're part of this movement that's starting something that could become, it'll be whatever it is. It doesn't have to be that, the Waterloo region. But that's so important. So whatever, start where you are. Have confidence about your direction. It's not just about you. It is, but it isn't. Remember that it won't always be like this. It could be worse. It's always, no, I'm not kidding. I'm kidding. Things change, and it's surprising how you'll finally get that plot of land back in the swamp that you've been looking for 5 years. You won't be able to build a house on it, but the other, I was going to say a bit about climate changes. The plant hardiness index has changed. I don't know if you noticed that in the last 20 years. So you can look it up for yourself at plant hardiness. But like Corner Brook went from 4B to 5A. So it's based on a number scale. So 49 would be 4B, 51 is 5A. Pasadena is still 4B. Richard, yeah, you're still at 4B, but you went up to 49. Cormac, still 4A, but it's gone up a little bit. Now, you have microenvironments change this entirely, but Gander, 4B to 5A, Bishop's Falls stays at 4B. Grand Falls went from 4B to 4A. Port Blandford went from 5A to 4B. So not every place increased in terms of its plant hardiness in the last 20 years. Clarenville, where we are now, went from 5A to 4B. Lethbridge from 5B to 4B. Nobody tell Krista that, because she'll be upset to hear that, because it probably hasn't affected her farm at this point. But we're not quite sure why. Some people say it's because of the icebergs melting. But Twillingate, which is one of the iceberg capitals of the world, went from 4B to 5A, and St. Anthony is still 3B. And those folks in Labrador, Churchill Falls, from 1A to 1B. But again, you're talking about gardens, and people may have amazing gardens. Huge numbers of community gardens in some of those communities. So don't tell them about this, because it might get them depressed, because it's what you put in those gardens and how you deal with the soil. But this is what you're starting with. Happy Valley Goose Bay, Sayes to 2B, Rigolet 2A to 2B, Nain from 1B, 1A to 1B, Lensalou 3A to 3B. So they're still talking about challenges. Okay, finally, this is it. I think sustainable agriculture is being open to what nature is telling us as well. I talked about that earlier. You're the expert on what's around you. Stop farming against nature. This is what Gabe Brown says. Sometimes we're farming against nature. It's not going to work, but we try. Trust your connection to your land, that's where you want to be. Basically, what that says is when we talk about environments and ecosystems and so on, that's the wrong word. The right word is I farm on this river, I farm by this mountain. The way we refer to our farms is referring to the geography of the area, really. It's not like I have a small ecosystem near the Churchill River. An academic might say that, but we really need to remember about our connection to those specific pieces of territory that we farm, and we name it that, and that's what it is, and we need to be focusing on that. I like big plans, but I like small steps better. The reason why we are where we are is because a lot of small steps too. Going backwards is sometimes small steps, and you don't realize it till all of a sudden you say, what the hell happened here? I don't know, some of you maybe woke up a couple of years ago got on Facebook for the first time in a few years, and you're saying, oh my God, where have I been? Those were all small steps. We said, it's okay if we do this. It's okay if we take away this. Let the bank go somewhere else. Oh, you can bank on the internet. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah. You can go to church over there. We can close that post office down. Don't worry. So even negative things are from lots of small steps, but positive things can be from small steps as well. So what crops should I grow? Self-care is a good one. And AgriCare is going to talk all about that. Joy and gratitude, community connections. And just for heaven's sake, don't be so hard on yourself. There's a whole song we could sing about that, but finally, the power of pulse. In regenerative agriculture, there's one thing that they use sometimes as pulse. And that's the idea that in any environmental system, there are moments of activity and frenetic activity sometimes, and there are moments of rest and quiet. You need to use the pulse in order to survive. Use that energy. And so with individual farms and individual sustainability, one has to recognize that as well. You just can't be at 110%. When one of the many university presidents I served under came, I won't tell you what his name was, or her name, whatever. First speech to all of us said, I want you working at 90%, maybe 85%, so that you will give 110 or 120% when you need it. They wanted 120% all the time when they actually started in there. But I thought that was a good idea, that what he said, not what he did. But we need to be able to understand that nature works that way as well. It's cyclical. And so there will be times when your place becomes more sustainable and moves forward. And there'll be times when it feels like you just need to rest. And now it's time to eat. I think, probably. Thanks very much.